So this is going to be about 30 minutes of meditation. Get comfortable, hopefully. It's a lovely bell sound, but it probably sounds like a thud on your end. Sorry, I still haven't made the attempt to figure out how to change that on Zoom. It'll happen one of these days. So today it's my intention to talk about fear, and the basis of fear and what we can do about it, according to the Buddha, according to the Dhamma. So as we settle in here to meditation, we can take a moment to reflect on how fear is really all about the world. We can talk about that later, see if you agree with me. And when we meditate, we're really leaving the world behind. Becoming quiet, quieting the body, sitting still but relaxed and alert. And calming the mind. And this is because the world begins to go away when we get really quiet, or not thinking about the things we have to do or the people in our life or our memories from the past or our hopes and fears for the future. We're here in the present moment. And really, meditation takes us beyond, of course, letting go of the things that are weighing on us or the things that are exciting us, the things of the world. But it helps us lean into, and you might say, bring or allow the state of mind to arise that's really the other world. The Buddha said that part of right view is to know that there is this world and there is the other world, the spiritual world. And when we look at other traditions, they have the same idea. There is this world and there is the other world. There may be different ideas about what the other world is, possibly because there are many different versions of it. But to know that this world, with all of its dangers and sadness and joy and excitement, this is not the only place, not the only state of mind. And probably the most common meditation object helping us to let go of this world is the breath. So in the yoga philosophy, they talk about the physical body, and then a layer kind of beyond it, the astral body, I think, is the next layer. I may be misremembering, but this next layer outside the physical body is kind of an energetic body, more spiritual, really a spiritual kind of form. And there's a layer in between, which is the breath. The breath really, of course, is very physical. On the one hand, it brings oxygen, takes away carbon dioxide, but it's also a gateway or an avenue to the spiritual, the energetic. So when we bring our mindfulness to the breath, we're really opening that door to what lies beyond this world. And this is why when we read the Satipatthana Sutta, each of the objects of mindfulness is followed by this refrain of being mindful internally and externally, etc. And then ends with meditating without any longing or grief for this world. Or sometimes it's translated as without longing for anything in this world. And that's because for the time being, we've put the world aside. And then we can just relax into this world, this other world, letting go of sights, smells, tastes, the feeling of touch. Because if we stay present with the breath and we give it some time, and the mind becomes more quiet, then the senses start to close down. We're moving away from the sensual world. Hearing continues as the last one to close down. And then, of course, there's the mind. And when the other five senses close down for this time being, then we have an opportunity to really observe the mind. So spend this time quietly present with the breath, aware that we are letting go of the world and noticing what comes as a result. And if thoughts arise about this world, then remind yourself, this isn't the time. Now is the time to shift, to let go of everything from this world. So welcome back to this world. I'll see a few things about fear, and it's really motivated by the fact that it's come up a few times this week, talking about fear and hearing about fears that people are dealing with. And, and of course, it's such a common, ordinary, completely natural experience. We all understand it. We all have fears. We live in this world and it's an unsafe place. I mean, everything really is uncertain, and it's, not the way we would like it to be, because it's always changing and there are plenty of dangerous things. We were visiting a neighbor the other day, and he pointed out that a mountain lion had jumped into the back of his pickup truck, in and out again. Not while we were there, but we could see the paw marks, the claw marks going into the back of the truck and coming back out. I mean, the truck is parked like right there in front of their house. This is like at the one end of our property. And of course, mountain lions are, one thing you can be afraid of. I mean, here in California, this is the bhikkhuni or bhikkhu's tiger stories. It's like we have mountain lions. I remember Ajahn Mahabua said that he never really got over fear of tigers, even though he was an arhat for decades. He never got over fear of tigers. What does that mean? I think it means that when he would hear a tiger or see a tiger or smell a tiger, that the body would react. So of course we all have those things, even if we've completely realized what this world is and the way things actually are. Some things are going to evoke fear. And so this is something to look at, like what kinds of things are naturally appropriate to be afraid of and reasonable, and what kinds of things are unreasonable fears. So I heard a snippet of broadcast on the radio where a doctor was talking about the way we are with COVID, with the pandemic these days, and talking about how much for some of us it's caused us to be afraid of being with other people, or having some fear, maybe a respectful fear of contracting the virus is understandable, useful. But he said, if you see someone in their 30s walking down the street without anybody else around but wearing a mask, it makes you think, there's perhaps an unreasonable fear there. That when we have reasonable fear, we understand the thing that we're fearing, then we can make decisions, we can understand how it works, learn from it. And instead of being afraid, do the things that keep us safe. So it's a little like that out here with poison oak. People might be afraid of getting poison oak. Can't blame them. I've had some pretty bad cases of it, and it's no fun at all. But you still walk through the forest, but you just get to know what poison oak looks like, and you try to stay clear of it. And If you can't stay clear of it, then you do the right things to clean up afterwards, and you probably get away without getting too bad a case of it, if any. And so it's like, this is how we can approach so many things in life, in the world. Like we get to know the nature of rattlesnakes. You get to know the nature of mountain lions, and so on and so forth. And you learn how to live together. As Ajahn Pasano said to me one time when I was concerned about walking from the sala, the place where we would meditate, back to where I was staying, and I said, something about all the animals there, bears and mountain lions and whatnot. And he said, well, they have their own life. They're not really that interested in you. I mean, of course, there could be times when that's not the case. You don't want to surprise them and so on. Okay, so I think you get the idea. So like we learned a lot about COVID in the last 2 years. We learned maybe it's not so necessary to be washing your vegetables in the produce market, but it's very important to be careful about what air we're breathing, and if we're using masks and things like that to be safe. Okay, so where does this leave us? What kinds of fears do you struggle with? Like what kinds of fears come up? A lot of times people will have a lot of fear and worry about things that might happen that never happen. Or we might notice that we have fear arising like during the middle of the night, and then as soon as we get up, it somehow disappears. And this is just coming to understand our own mind. We get to know this mind, and most of the things that come up in it, maybe we could say everything, is from the past conditioning. We can't really take responsibility for that at this point. I mean, we can take responsibility for things we've consciously done and learned from, and that's good. But I mean, things that pop into the mind that we might be afraid of, we don't have to own it. It's not really ours. It's part of a process that's been in play for who knows how long, how many lifetimes. And now we have a choice. We have a choice for how we respond to that process, how we manage it. And so here it's really good to look at what the Buddha did, because he has a couple of places. Well, he talks about fear and how we can live without fear and without worry. And so one of the suttas that you might be familiar with is in the Majjhima Nikaya, number 4. It's called Fear and Dread, one translation of it. And the Buddha actually, I think I might share it with you. I think I have it here somewhere. This isn't it. We're getting there. Here's the Fear and Dread Sutta. And I'm not going to read it. I don't expect you to read it, but I'm going to scroll down here into the area where he's talking about having fear. Now, this is before he was enlightened. He talks about having fear being in the forest. He's being told, oops, went too far, sorry. There are, before my awakening, when I was still unawakening, but intending to awaken, I thought remote lodgings in the wilderness and the forest are challenging. It's hard to maintain seclusion, and it's hard to find joy in it. Staying alone, the forest seemed to rob the mind of a mendicant who isn't immersed in samadhi. So here's a clue. Being immersed in samadhi, this is the other world, right? The spiritual world. And then there's a kind of protection. They say even physically, if you're immersed in samadhi, that you're not going to have anything happen to your body that would harm it. But he's pointing out here that we're not always immersed in samadhi. And then, he would think about how, and he relates, well, first of all, before this, he says that, he would hear a deer walk by or a peacock break a branch or some other sound. And probably everybody's had that experience where we get afraid of something, though it's not really a threat. And then he would think about this fear. And then he would remind himself that that he doesn't have to be afraid because he has pure conduct by body, speech, and mind. Now, how does that relate? It's like he talks about, well, other people, other mendicants out there who don't have unpurified conduct, they might be afraid, but I'm one who has purified conduct. And then I don't need to feel afraid. And if we think about that, it's like, how does that keep us safe? Well, for one thing, even if for some reason we die right there, we don't have to worry about the future if we are pure in mind, if we've settled all the disputes, if we've finished all of our unwholesome habits. And then he talks about livelihood in the same way, not being full of desire, having a heart full of love, not one with ill will or malicious intent, free of dullness, drowsiness. He goes through the 5 hindrances here. Not being cowardly, not lacking energy, etc. These ways of, the mind being still, pure, a life that's pure. So if we're dealing with fear, one place we can look is, how can I clean up my ethics, my sila? How can I clean up the way I interact with people, be more loving, bring more of that into my life? It's like bringing more spiritual qualities into our life, operating in every aspect of our life from those spiritual qualities. And I know a lot of you do this already, but do you remind yourself that that's true when fear and worry arise? Can you get a sense of how we can feel confident and comfortable, even though this world is really dangerous, even though there may be who knows what will happen next? There's another sutta that I mention often in the Anguttara Nikaya, in the Book of Nines, number 5, called Powers, and you've probably heard me talk about it. I think it's a great sutta. It talks about the 4 powers and the 5 fears. The 5 fears being the fear of death, the fear of what comes after death, the fear of losing one's livelihood, the fear of feeling afraid or intimidated or timid in an assembly, in a group of people. There's one more.
Also livelihood, maybe bad reputation.
Fear of getting a bad reputation. Thank you. Fear of getting a bad reputation. And he said you don't have to have any of those fears if you know the difference between what's wholesome and unwholesome. So that's the power of wisdom. You use your energy to live in a wholesome way and avoid what's unwholesome. It's the power of energy. And the power of blamelessness, really keeping the precepts, living a blameless life. Do you have the feeling that you're living a blameless life? I mean, if you think about yesterday, anything the noble ones, the arahants would blame you for. And what if there is? As Ajahn Paññavāda said, if I'm guilty, so what? We just learn from that. We're all learning. We learn from that and we make whatever amends we can, but mainly we go on with a different intention as we move forward. And then the fourth one, I know I've mentioned before, the power of sustaining favorable relationships. You know, spiritual friends, even if they don't appear to be spiritual. You know, the Buddha said, look for people who have more wisdom than you do and try to be like them. Look for people with better virtue than you have and try to be like them. People who are more generous. Try to be like them. People who have deeper faith. We always have some room for improvement, but it's really important that we're not, I don't want to say, pushing ourselves too hard also. That we appreciate all the goodness that we've brought into our lives and that we keep cultivating. And so these kinds of mental states where we really bring the appreciation for ourselves and others, the appreciation for what's good in our life, loving kindness, compassion, and evenness of mind, more into all situations. We don't have to have so much fear. And we know how to handle it when it arises. We don't have to have so much guilt. We can recognize that this is a learning process. And it's a process that we were kind of handed when we came into this world. And we've had to deal with it until now. And hopefully through it, we've learned and changed some things that were worth changing. And even, even though you may have come a long way down the path, if you're still afraid when something happens, it's like Ajahn Mahabua, maybe the body will still react, maybe the mind will still react, but you'll have the tools to go, wait a minute, it's really okay. This is the way things are. If I have the karma to get eaten by the mountain lion, then that's how it'll be. But I can go happy regardless. All right. Now, I'd like to know what you think. Yes, Carrie.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to go back in the living room in a few minutes. So thank you for raising this. I've been thinking so much about this lately. And I know I've talked about this before because I think of it in the context of what I call biology or the instinctive reactions of the body, because we're animals and we have a lot of deep instinctive reactions. And the way I've been thinking about fear is by noticing how when I'm reacting to something and I'm angry and I'm defensive and I'm arguing, like she said this and when I really sink down into it, underneath that is, in my case, often a deep fear from a very young age of not being loved, that just like the fear of the tiger, I think will always be there. But the way that I've been practicing with that is by backing out of the chain of dependent origination, which many years ago you said, if you don't know what that is, you should learn about it. And I took that to heart. And I back out to the feeling tone. Mm-hmm. And I'm finding that really helpful because fear is unpleasant. and it's supposed to be unpleasant because fear is a survival instinct. And so when I can back out to like, well, this is unpleasant, and guess what? It's supposed to be unpleasant. My body is trying to keep me alive. That gives me an option to react in a different way or think about it. And I'm also like noticing that when I have a pleasant, when I'm like planning or thinking, my mind is this, that actually underneath the anxiety of planning is a pleasant feeling that settles my nervous system, that feeling of security and safety, as if I could control the future, I would feel safe. And so just like today, listening to your guided meditation, I was really thinking about how to utilize that ability to create that sense of safety in my body to help hold the fear. Because if you have, you know how they say pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. I mean, all that stuff we layer on top of it is the optional stuff. So I have doubt going like, no, you're on the wrong track by thinking so much about instinct, but it's just like really pulling me in this direction of just settle into the natural animal responses, back up to that response, set aside all the conditioning and reactivity, and then go from there. So that's kind of where my practice is. What do you think about that?
Yeah, that sounds really good. I like that, I think that's right on. It just, we keep applying the principles of the Dhamma as we back into it and come back out of it. So, it's like, and that's what you're doing. It's like you look at that animal response and you go, oh yeah, that's how it is, and we have this spiritual aspect. We're human beings. We have the spiritual aspect. We have that otherworldly connection. When the Buddha talked about feeling, there's pleasant, mundane or earthly or worldly feeling, and then there's pleasant unworldly feeling. The jhanas, rapture, piti, sukha, it's like those experiences that carry us beyond this physical reality. So when you back into the feelings, understanding, like you said, those things that happen to us in early childhood, we could have a whole process of reacting around that and not even know where it came from. And even from previous lifetimes, you may not be able to recognize where it came from. Or maybe you will remember from a previous lifetime sometimes where something came from. And that can help. Sometimes it can help us see why we do what we do. If we really knew all about where this chitta has been, we would know why we do what we do. But, like you said, really, really taking a look at that, a kind look, instead of a self-blaming look. And then really applying the Dhamma, knowing the way things actually are, that this is what we can expect from life. And it's okay. Yeah, thank you, Kaylee. Anyone else? Any questions? Anything you felt like was not quite how it is for you, Val?
I just wanted to say thank you so much for this talk. The guided meditation was wonderful as well. And your talk was just so many good reminders around fear I liked remembering, oh yeah, this is old conditioning. This isn't necessarily, this isn't me. It's just old stuff happening, and it's okay to let go of it. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. Neil?
I was going to try not to say anything because there's so much coming up since 9 a.m. From your talk, from the guided meditation, from what Carrie said. I thought, let me just sit with it. But when no one was raising their hand, I just sort of felt like, okay, I guess I'm supposed to say something. Yeah, I just have to say, it's just such a blessing to have you. The meditation, the connecting, the breath as the intermediary between this world and that, I mean, blew my mind. And for reasons that will take me too long to go into, that have to do with my having trouble using the breath all of my life, and a recent meditation practice I've just started on that's got me now understanding better how to use the breath. And then I come in today and you say that, and it's just like expanding. And then talking about fear, I think I've pretty much overcome. I mean, I used to have a lot of anxiety in my life, and it's been quite a few years since I've experienced the kind of intense anxiety that I used to. And it's very odd that just this week, on Tuesday, I woke up with incredible anxiety. And I had two things planned for the day, which I probably shouldn't have had two such intense things. One was go to the dentist to have my teeth ground down for another bridge, followed by driving into 2.5 miles into San Francisco to see a Broadway musical, and seeing the Broadway musical does not give me anxiety, but driving into San Francisco does. And while I was sitting in the dentist chair, I had a realization that I've had before, which is I keep noticing that my whole body is clenching. And I'm like, I know this dentist, I like this dentist, I trust this dentist. I have no reason to be afraid, but it's exactly what you talked about with Ajahn Mahabua and the tiger. It's, the body knows that somebody is invading is intimately invading my body, and it's just tensing up. And each time I caught it, I would just say, okay, relax the muscles. And then, within a matter of minutes, it's all clenched up again, and I just have to accept that that's the case. But what I couldn't understand was the knot in my stomach, from the moment I woke up about driving into the city. And, by the time the whole day was over and, 10 o'clock at night, I'm driving back to Ukiah, and I just feel fine. It's all been lifted, because the whole anxiety has been lifted. And I realize it's all just a lot of, as a singer, what we call muscle memory. And the only thing to do about it is to just recognize it and try to let it go. Just so much that I'm hooking into today, and I feel like I'm babbling on. But thank you so much for being there.
Yeah, you're welcome, Neil. And I think you said a lot of things that make a lot of sense. I think I might have shared with you when for the last 40 years or so, I've not done anesthetic when I go to the dentist, and I have the same experience, like my body tenses up. And the whole meditation, what takes me into a space of being able to be okay with the pain is a relaxing. I start at the toes and I go up my body and I relax every part of my body. And then by the time I get to the top, I used to avoid the place where the pain was being originated, but then later I learned how I could be present with that, be with it directly. But by the time I get to the top, the toes are clenched again, and I gotta go back through. And the whole meditation is really strong then, and there's no it's not like you don't feel the pain at all, but it's not a problem. And this, we can take this as a metaphor. We can talk to ourselves. And I really found it fascinating when I read Stillness Flowing, how Ajahn Chah would talk to himself, give himself a talking to. He would do both sides of the problem, the part that's reacting and the part that knows the Dhamma. And he would have these conversations with himself. And I find that really useful for myself, because we are working with all this old material, and we have these patterns and these reactions. But if we can kind of talk ourselves through it from the place of the Dhamma and let ourselves express that reactive part too, to really not bury it under something, but to be present with it. And then what we learn when we go through these things, like being in the dentist chair and having them do whatever they do. I did a root canal one time without anesthetic. The dentist told me ahead of time, it's not going to be too bad because the root's already dead, and it wasn't too bad. But it's like, then you go through it and then you can do it. It's like, oh, this really isn't so bad. This is doable. I can deal with this. It's not a problem. And there's a point where we learn that this human life is not a problem. No matter what it throws at us. Anybody else? Yes, Lisa?
Yeah, sorry, all of a sudden I couldn't find the icon for hand raising, but I know it's there somewhere. Yeah, thank you for bringing this topic today. It's what other people have said, especially what Katie said about our survival instinct rising. It's something I think about very often about, if even though we may know that life is ever changing and so much out of our control, we can't quite accept that. So there's some basic fear that just comes up again and again. And those 4 powers that you were talking about, I guess that's a way of focusing on what we can control. What we can control is our own ethical behavior and the relationships that we sustain and work on. I didn't quite catch if there were 4. I got the wisdom, blamelessness, and favorable relationships. Was there something else that I missed on that?
The energy. So the one on wisdom, the first one's wisdom. And the way wisdom is defined here is the knowledge of what's wholesome and what's unwholesome. And that really is wisdom. We know what's good for us and what's not good for us, and not just in a, like what I'm gonna like or dislike, but what's actually wholesome, what's actually not wholesome. And of course, things like keeping the precepts, things like right speech, all of its aspects, things like, contentment rather than craving or desire, kindness rather than ill will, and right view. Those are really the wholesome things. So knowing the difference between the wholesome and the unwholesome, that's number one, wisdom. And then the second one is energy. We have to put in the effort, the energy to do the wholesome and to put the unwholesome aside. And the third one is blamelessness, a really, really good sila, moral virtue. And then the fourth one is sustaining favorable relationships. And it's true that these are the things we can control. We have the ability to choose these things. But it's also the case that these behaviors make it so, like those things we don't have to be afraid of. You don't have to be afraid of getting a bad reputation, for example. Well, why? Because whatever anyone might say about you, that's negative. It's just not true. Or if we make mistakes, but we own up to them and we try to change them, we don't continue doing the same thing, that's harmful. I mean, that's admirable. I mean, not worrying about kind of being timid in a group of people. We can hold our head up high anywhere with any group of people, no matter, like they may have more education than we do, or more money than we do, or more success, or more whatever, or it doesn't matter. Like if you have those things, being a really good person, being really moral and upright, being really kind and caring, you don't have to feel diminished in any circle. Don't have to feel timid in any circle. I mean, we might feel that way, but we can remind ourselves, we can have one of those conversations with ourselves, excuse me, and remember that we don't have to feel timid or afraid. But look at the other side. What if you live the other way? Being unwholesome, living against the precepts, being lazy and not having the energy to, shape your experience in a wholesome direction, but going the other way, not being a trustworthy friend. Well, then you're always looking over your shoulder, worrying. You're always, afraid. Joyce?
Hi, I'm going to give this a try because I was really astounded to see that in that sutta, which Neil just said was Anguttara Nikaya number 9, number 5. Is that right? I think that timid in a group of people. And that really hit me because that's what I am. In fact, right now my heart is beating really, really fast because I'm doing this. And I'm just going to do it because you mentioned that. This was truly an astounding talk. I mean, it just really hit home so strongly and Carrie did just an amazing summary of what I was feeling. I love to be so articulate. But last night I was reading a chapter by Ajahn Amaro called something like Puncturing Your Papancha. And in it, he talked about the world exactly as you were saying. And I never understood that before, how we create the world we're in through our perceptions with that whole chain of independent origination. And that assignment I got from New Year's was about the sense contact and that whole area, which I've always been so curious about. And that just made so much sense reading what he said about this. Let me see. I just have to just kind of, I don't know if I'm going to be able to remember now because it was so astounding reading this chapter. Because in it, he starts to talk about other cultures. One culture he talked about, particularly in South America and the Amazon, where they have no concept of number. And there were a couple of other things where if a person is not present, they cannot talk about that person. They just cannot, because they don't relate. A person is not there, so they can't talk about it. And just reading this and realizing how attached we are to those things that are not necessarily real. They're just beliefs that we have, that we have numbers and we have dates and all of that. And it's impossible almost to read this and have a sense of what it would mean to not have a number or not understand a number. Yeah. So we're creating our world. And I'm just walking around in awe. And I'm so glad that you followed in this and tracking back. That was another thing that Ayya Santussika recommended. Exactly what Carrie was doing was going backward through, once you discover, you're lost in thought or whatever it is, and go backward to try to find that seed. And I know it wouldn't be easy, but to do that, it would be so freeing. So, I don't know, I'm just very moved. So thank you so much for this talk.
You're welcome. Yeah. Free ourselves from the prison of those perceptions. And all along being really kind to ourselves, knowing that, yeah, these feelings, these worries, these fears, this is all conditioned, it's natural. We're not afraid of anything we don't know anything about. We had to come in contact with this idea before, or there wouldn't be fear. I mean, even the most basic thing, it's because we have a human body. It's because we've come into this existence. So we can be really, really generous with ourselves, really kind, and still guide ourselves towards peace and happiness. The unshakable kind. Do you know the name of your book? What's the name of your book? Joyce, do you know?
No, I don't have it right here, but I think the name of the book is Breakthrough.
Okay.
And he talks a lot about practice, and he's got a lot of meditation practices in there. But he spent so much time on this chapter untangling something that's been such a knot, and I think it is for a lot of people. I mean, it's the way he did it, just brilliant. I think it's called Breakthrough.
Okay. And since it's from Ajahn Amaro, it would be available on the Amaravati website, probably as a free download.
And also by Giri. I have it on my Kindle, but I think there might even be hard copies available, but I think it's going to be quite long.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Joyce.
Send it to me, and I'm so grateful.
Yeah. Yes, Linda?
You recently talked to me about a different sutta in the linked discourses, I guess third chapter, number 25, the simile of the mountain. And for me, there's the one line there that to me just addressed this issue so well. And it's, what could I do but practice the teachings, practice morality, doing skillful and good actions? And the reason that was so impactful to me is that, there's these fears, and I do all of the rational things to mitigate them. And yet, even doing those, I've had the tendency to still fret over them. And I've already done everything reasonable to eliminate them. And for me, just that line just resonated so much with me. So I wanted to share that with everybody, and thank you so much for that.
You're welcome. Thank you for sharing that, because it takes us that step farther. Now, this sutta is one that most of you probably know about. It's the one where the Buddha says to King Pasenadi, what if, sorry about that light, that's a little intense. I do not have a halo as far as I know. Well, I probably do, but not quite that visible. Okay. This sutta where the Buddha says to King Pasenadi, great king, what would you do if a man came from, I think he said, the east, and he reported, this is a person you trust, and he reported that there is this mountain moving towards the kingdom, and it's rolling over everything, destroying everything that it comes to, and it's coming in. And then another one came from the south and said there's a mountain coming from the south doing the same thing, and one from the west and one from the north, and it's all coming. He said, what would you do? And then what Linda read, that was the answer. Could you read that again, Linda? Could you say it again?
What could I do but practice the teachings, practice morality, doing skillful and good actions?
Yeah. Yeah. And how often does that take us out of ourselves? Takes us out of our worry. And then, what happens when there's a big disaster? So many people really exhibit what's best in themselves, what's transcendent. Real generosity, kindness, a sense of really taking care of each other. I was listening to a talk by Ajahn Brahmali earlier today, and he talked about a book that was written about the people in Norway. So he's Norwegian, and he was talking about this book from the time of World War II. And Norway was overrun by the Nazis, like most of the rest of Europe, and they suffered from not having enough food, and it's hard to grow things in Norway, so it was really a hardship, and many other hardships during that time, including the fear for the part of the population that was Jewish, and they were taken to concentration camps, and just all kinds of things. But he said there was this study about happiness, and it was to talk with different people about happiness before the war and during the war. And it was discovered that people were actually happier during the war, even though they had so much hardship. And the reason was because people actually kind of would band together, like take care of each other. There was so much more of an outpouring of human kindness. As Ajahn Brahmali said, they kind of had a common enemy. It was the German army, but they were together, had so much more, many more beautiful experiences. And this is what really caused their happiness, even though physically they were really suffering. Okay, we're going to change this. Physically, they were really suffering. So it's something to think about. It's like, what really brings us to life? What really brings us beyond this world? all those qualities, those are spiritual qualities that are really here for us. And also that's what the spiritual world is about. Neil?
Just a quick comment that what you were just talking about put me in mind of a wonderful movie called Hope and Glory about a British town during the Blitz in World War II. And it's just this wonderful film of how, the people coped. And it's practically a comedy, and yet it's very, very real.
Would you say the title again? Because I missed it.
Hope and Glory.
Hope and Glory?
Yeah, I think it was from the 80s.
Okay. Yeah, not always, but we once in a while hear about movies that we put on the rated N list, which is none approved. So we'll check it out.